Let me begin by saying how pleased I am that one of my favorite organizations has found a home in one of my favorite cities among so many of my favorite people. The Aspen Institute belongs in Prague, just as the themes of today's conference belong on its agenda. Our title refers to crisis as opportunity, a hopeful proposition that I will use the next few minutes to explore, and I'd like to begin with a little perspective. 92 years ago, in one of his first speeches to the Czechoslovak parliament, President Thomas Garrigue Masaryk emphasized three themes. First was the need for people to work together across the boundaries of ethnicity and state. Second was his belief that evil, whether originating from within or from without, must be opposed. And third was the need for patience. In that year of 1920, the new republic had achieved independence, but had not yet found its balance. Public expectations were high, but so was frustration. Citizens hungered for miracles in the form of instant solutions to economic and social difficulties. President Masaryk warned that this hunger was beyond his power to satisfy. Czechs and Slovaks, he said, would have to generate their own miracles by treating each other with respect, living up to democratic principles, and working hard to make their new country a success. In the more than 9 decades since those remarks were made, much has changed, but Masaryk's basic prescription for unity, moral vigilance, and patience is still apt. As any student of history knows, there are moments in time when powerful forces clash and whole civilizations rise or fall. But the challenge our leaders face more often is less dramatic, and that is to help governments deliver on the promise of a better life for their citizens. In the world today, there is little appetite for a return to fascism or imperial rule, but there is much concern about the effectiveness of democracy. As in 1920, people are impatient with their governments, not only in this part of the world, but in all of Europe, America, and beyond. As understandable as this may be, we cannot allow frustration to harden into despair. We have a practical interest in showing that the democratic path remains the right one for security, prosperity, and law. Our task begins with the requirement that democratic nations work together, but this can, in fact, be an elusive goal. Governments that want to cooperate can still find themselves divided by competing interests and hemmed in by domestic politics. What seems smart to one country may seem ill-advised to another, and what seems fair to one may cause outrage in the next. It should be no surprise then that headlines today are dominated by tales of conflict. In Europe, the debt crisis has highlighted the extent to which national differences still matter, even within organizations designed to transcend such differences. In Russia, Vladimir Putin has regained the presidency, but appears to be squandering the respect and support of his people and also of the international community. In the Middle East, democratic momentum has been uneven because factions that agree on the need for change are often at odds about the kind of transformation they desire. In the United States, partisan bickering has created a poisonous climate in which many politicians seem more determined to attack opponents than to solve problems. Meanwhile, the combination of new technology and social networking has empowered citizens everywhere to voice their views with a breadth, immediacy, and volume never before possible. And this matters because of the widely held perception that our leaders are betraying the future by failing to create jobs, reduce debt, safeguard the environment, instill moral values, and end conflict. For their part, presidents and prime ministers often find that their responsibilities exceed their power and are being removed from office at a record rate. Along the way, many people have lost faith in the institutions relied on to provide stability, including the United Nations, the World Bank, the EU, and NATO. And surveys show that a popular majority, especially in the West, believes that our countries are headed in the wrong direction. So what are we to make of all this? My own reaction is that although we can't afford to underestimate these problems, neither should we be panicked by them. Struggle is part of the human condition, and our present difficulties pale in comparison to those confronted in the past. Consider, for example, the question of European unity. This subject has special resonance in this capital, where earlier efforts to erase national borders were imposed by powerful neighbors. The current economic vulnerabilities are worrisome, but they will never divide this continent in the manner of Hitler or Stalin. The tasks of running the European Union and of administering the Eurozone raise questions of economic philosophy and fiscal competence, but they do not weaken the rationale for joint institutions or destroy the prospects for effective coordination. With few exceptions, most major political parties in most countries are still committed to helping the new Europe achieve its goals. And that's a strong incentive for faith, for trying even harder to identify the right balance between national prerogatives and collective interests. Similarly, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization is being pushed by its operation in Afghanistan, a mission to which this republic has long been a worthy contributor. That effort has entered a new and hopefully final phase as the responsibility for security that has been borne by the alliance gradually shifts to where it belongs, the Afghan people. There are some who suggest that NATO has lost relevance in recent years, in part because, as we talked about earlier, members do not always agree on the threats they face or the tactics they employ. Managing a 28-member alliance can be a daunting job, especially when resources are tight and strategists must cope with traditional emerging dangers simultaneously. Yet those who criticize NATO today have a duty to imagine how Europe might change tomorrow if the alliance ceased to exist. NATO's not perfect, but it remains the world's most capable defender of liberty and law, and it's learning new lessons all the time. Finally, there are pundits, some of whom sat on this stage, who claim that the transatlantic partnership has become obsolete and that when America contemplates the future, it thinks first of the Asia-Pacific. But to accept that conclusion is to misread history and to confuse good news with bad. When the United States looks at Europe today, it sees a continent that has been transformed from a source of chronic strife into the world's leading model of how former enemies can live as neighbors. Where Europe once posed a threat to global security, it is now a vital part of the solution. And whether the issue involves finance, trade, arms control, terrorism, or the future of democratic values, the Euro-Atlantic Partnership will continue to assume a pivotal role. It's true that the world today is not as peaceful, prosperous, and united as we would like it to be, and many of our institutions are in need of freshening, and there remain important questions to which we must find better answers. And yet we also have a very firm foundation on which to build. In the first decade of my life, the world fell apart. War engulfed virtually all of Europe and Asia. The Holocaust confronted us with the worst of what humankind can do, and the age of nuclear anxiety began. Today, the major powers are at peace with one another. Incidents of outright international aggression are rare. Totalitarian ideologies are generally discredited. War criminals live in fear. And the global economy, despite its shortcomings, is still producing broader overall prosperity than most generations have ever known. It's fair to say that we live in an age of uncertainty, but we also have much for which to be grateful. Looking ahead, my advice is that we spend less time quarreling about the past and more time looking for practical ways to solve future problems. It's no coincidence that the launch of the Aspen Institute in Prague is designed with precisely that purpose in mind. By training new leaders, developing new ideas, and forming new connections, it will benefit each and all of us for many, many years to come. Thank you once again for your attention and for making me feel as if I've never left my first home. Thank you.